So with the advent of with Conrail looming on the horizon, I was working in Penn Central in operations planning in New York at the time, and ended up going to the Delaware and Hudson because through the magic of what you worked out at USRA, the Delaware and Hudson doubled in size virtually overnight, and they needed more people. Can you take us back then to how that came about, where the D&H got the expansion of trackage rights to Buffalo and Potomac Yard and to Philadelphia, and the notion of competition that was introducing into the Conrail territory?
Because of the desire to have competition, and then the Chessie all of a sudden pulls out. The labor unions and the Chessie cannot agree to a deal. So therefore, all of a sudden, one of the premises of the plan was you're going to have some competition. Well, that was now all of a sudden going to be a big sticking point. Were we going back and start over again on this whole plan, or what are we going to do? My thoughts on the subject was, well, some better than nothing. So I worked up a deal with the D&H to expand where they wanted to expand, because they'd come to us and said, well, you got to protect us. We want to be in the business, but if you own everything, if Conrail owns everything in sight, we don't have any outlet to the rest of the world. So I said, okay, well, where do you want to go? So they talked about where they wanted to go. And so I said, all right.
Now, who were you dealing with at the D&H at that time? Do you remember?
No. Really,
well, Bruce Sturzing was the president.
Yeah, I think so.
And Bernie Phillips
was
the planning
Bruce
guy.
Sturzing, yeah, that's who it was. But it was, they were ready to go and wanted to do it. Well, my famous planners there, namely Gallimore and McClellan, were saying, "Oh, that's so feeble it won't pass muster." I said, "Well, look, my theory about business is don't let the good get driven out by the perfect." I think you heard me say that before. This is what we got. This is what we got to go with. So I'm going to pitch that. So I pitched it to the board, the DOT, then Congress, and it went through.
And you personally did the testimony in each of those cases. Yeah. How did it go? Was it smooth? Was there a lot of argument about it?
Oh, there was some argument. I mean, in the sense that the DOT was a little bit aggravated about that they didn't plan it. They didn't. I just made that part up, but I had a feeling that they didn't want to be told what the answer was, and so that's what we did. And Coleman was, a very forceful guy. He was really, he came down. When he wanted to do something, he wanted to do it, and that was going to be that.
But you got around his notion of not having government involvement. I mean, Conrail was a government corporation.
We did. We had this board at USRA, and it was made up of a shipper representative, a grain representative, a rural representative, a small town representative, all this stuff. But it also had the representative of the Secretary of the Treasurer and DOT and ICC. So there were three bodies. Well, the ICCs didn't help much, but at least they didn't harm us when they were on the board. They were a pretty good board member. So that was not bad. But the other two government guys were on there. having the treasury guy on there was good, because at one point, the White House called me personally and said, come over here and talk to Phil Buchan, who was Ford's personal lawyer. And so I said to our liaison with government people, I said, what do you think I should do? I said, don't give him a bunch of static. Don't give him your usual, let me tell you what the answer is story. Just listen politely. Well, what he wanted to tell me was, you're going to get your deal put through. Don't beat up on the Secretary of Transportation in public any more than you have to. So that's the reason it worked. And Coleman understood the game, because apparently they talked to him too.
Would seem so, right?
Yeah.
Right. So, I recall at the D&H, I ended up working for Tom Hagen, who was the vice president of finance. And one of the things that, speaking of having an analytical career, I got to do was analyze the profitability of our businesses, particularly the intermodal business from Oak Island to interchange with N&W at Buffalo. And very little of the traffic that we could move made any money. In fact, we were losing money on the intermodal business, which Bruce, our president, didn't want to hear, but was the reality at the time. And it really was a difficult challenge. And the D&H, I think it was one of those cases where the company was failing, but people didn't really want to, it had a long history, one of the oldest transportation companies in the country. But we were down to originating something like 300 cars a day on the whole railroad. And so it was really, really difficult. In looking back, do you think there's any other way that could have been structured to have strengthened the alternative competition?
Yeah, probably you could have given D&H or maybe some other railroads. There was like Mark EL was proposed.
Right.
Could have let some of these other guys do it. There was a certain amount of danger, though, to give these people a whole bunch of trackage or give them actual pieces of the plant. Because looking at the mergers over the years and how well they've done, the idea when Jesse and NS took over Conrail, they thought, oh, we know everything, this is a piece of cake. It was a disaster. Union Pacific takes over the SP.
Right.
It was a disaster. Well, that's one of the things that I was afraid of is, well, just going back to your time, New York Central and the Pennsylvania Railroad, that was a disaster. So I really was concerned about splitting this property up into a whole bunch of pieces so that, one, you'd have competition, and two, they would be financially viable.
So you talked about the task that Victor Hand did with his crew and evaluating the assets and what's in the tent and what's outside the tent. And that sounds really challenging given the scope of all of that. But then you also have, on the other hand, the other side of that, you have all the employees who are, Erie, Lackawanna, or New Jersey Central, or Lehigh Valley. I mean, they're oftentimes proud of their heritage and their property.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
And how did you contemplate integrating all of, there's a lot of duplicate positions in those companies and so forth. So how did you had to discuss that at USRA?
One of the things that we've kind of told Ed Jordan and when he was going up there, look, you're going to have a real problem on that basis because these people come from all over and everything. And probably what not to do is what they did on the Penn Central was have a red guy and then a black guy and then a red guy and then a black guy and a red guy, so that, or a green guy, I guess you should say. You just have to kind of mix them all together and just do the best you can. And I think it seemed to, I wasn't there at the creation, but by the time I got there in '77, I really had the feeling they all worked for Conrail.
Really?
Yeah.
That's remarkable.
Yeah, it is remarkable. Yeah. Yeah.
And railroads are slow to move in that heritage counts, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right. I think it had gone so badly in the last years when everybody's bankrupt and they're not fixing anything and they don't know whether they'll meet the payroll or not, that really, I think there was a certain amount of relief that, hey, we got
a solution.
We got a fresh start here. Let's see what we can do.
In 1976, with Conrail becoming a reality, Ed Jordan then moves up to Conrail as the CEO.
Yes.
And how did he get picked to go do that?
Don't know. Good question.
And who did it? Who picked him?
I would say probably DOT, whether it would be the secretary. I really don't know. Good question. I hadn't really thought about that.
Okay, fair enough. So, but when you left, you didn't go to Conrail. You went back to the Southern.
Yeah, as soon as the report came out, I kind of let it be known in the railroad industry that I was looking for work. Come April 1st, 1976. And so the first offer I had was from the secretary called me up and wanted me to be the FRA administrator. I said, well, no, I've had enough government for now. I think I'll pass. Well, then the next one was the Southern Railway call.
And who was that?
And that was, Claytor had set it up, but it was Bob Hamilton.
Oh, okay.
Made the pitch. And I was going to report to Hamilton.
Okay.
Which I did.
So it was going back home.
Yeah, going back home. Yeah. Right.
And the Southern was still headquartered in D.C. at this time.
Yes, right.
So you weren't moving or anything?
Yeah, we weren't moving, so it was, fine. It's good.
So, but you didn't stay very long.
No, one of the things I worked on there was an interesting deal. Was that come to find out that Downing Jinks had made known to Graham Claytor that he would like to talk about a merger. And of course, and it may be one of the reasons they hired me back there, I don't know, but wasn't long after I got there that they said, okay, we got this inkling of a merger. We need somebody to study it and decide what our role would be and how we're going to interface with the Missouri Pacific. So that's what I did. And that's interesting because it would have changed the structure of the rail industry quickly. It would have been very bad for Conrail because all that petrochemical stuff coming off the Gulf Coast would have been long hauled clear to Pot Yard or Cincinnati or someplace by Southern Railway. And the divisions were such that, boy, they really would have penalized this new Conrail. But you work for who you work for, and so That's what we were putting together. And then didn't go through. Jenks was agreeable, Claytor was agreeable, financial guys were agreeable, and they went back to the the Southern Railway Management guys, and they turned it down. It was too risky. So
The people under Claytor,
yeah,
they just didn't want to have any part of it.
right.
Figured that they would be out marched by the MOPAC people? Or?
I don't think so, really. Southern had such a strong marketing team but they over the years had not wanted to do much of anything. They like the Monon came up, they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to go to Chicago. All these various opportunities had come up over the years, and they said, no, we do what we do, and we like it, we're doing it well, and so here's what we're going to do. And then, of course, that put Crane in a bind when he took over, because people were merging around him. CSX.
When he took over at Southern.
Huh?
When Stanley Crane took over at Southern.
Yeah, right. He took over various places, but he took over Southern. Yeah. So then that's when he put McClellan to work looking for, should we look at the IC or what should we do?
So Jim went back to Southern with you, or at about the same time?
Yeah, as soon as I left, then Jim came back there and took that job.
And you were working together there at Southern? Or did you, when you left the Southern, he came?
Oh, as soon as he heard that I was going to leave, he immediately marched over and said to Mr. Crane, I hear Hagen's leaving. He said, where'd you hear that? I said, well, I heard it from Hagen. I said, well, and I'd like to apply for that job. And Mr. Crane said to him, well, you can be considered, but if you think you're going to get paid what Hagen got paid, that's not going to happen. He said, I'm not talking about the pay, I'm talking about the job. Crane said, you're hired.
On the spot.
On the spot.
So Jim McClellan had stayed at USRA until?
No, he went to, as soon as the thing was over, he went to Chef Lang, a friend of his,
Right.
was running a financial analytical group at the AAR.
Okay.
And it was kind of just a way station for Jim to
Park himself.
Yeah. The Secretary of Transportation was mad enough at McClellan and myself and several others that he didn't want any of those people going to Conrail.
This is Coleman?
Coleman.
So you guys came up with the solution. He didn't like the solution, I guess, so he's mad at you guys for that. Okay. That's how it works, I guess. So when the deal with the Missouri Pacific doesn't go through, how did you make the transition from there to Conrail?
Now I'm just a planning guy. Well, Bob Hamilton, Mr. Hamilton, had kind of implied that he was going to retire in a few years and that'd be my path of, well, I'm not big on sitting around waiting for things to happen. So when Conrail called up and said they want somebody to run the marketing sales job, I thought about it because it was a hell of a transition. My family was settled in Washington area, Arlington. But I thought, well, what the heck, let's go.
So who called from Conrail? Who was the?
Jordan. Yeah.
So you moved up to Greater Philadelphia.
I did.
And what was it like when you got there?
Scary. Got there and we just had a huge snowstorm. The whole New York, Pennsylvania area was shut down.
This was the
we're losing $1 million a day.
This is the blizzard of '78 in
Yeah.
February.
Right.
Yeah.
just got there in 77 and 78, this blizzard took place. Losing $1 million a day, trying to find out information and what to do and how to do it and so forth was about impossible. And so I figured, I went home and told Mary, I said, well, maybe we've moved one time too many here.
I'm sure she was delighted to hear that.
Yeah, right, especially after because she said, now don't agree to move up there till you come home and talk to me. I said, okay. So I came home and said, get packed, we're moving.
Yeah, I'm talking to you.
Yeah, I'm talking, so. But anyway, yeah, it was really a going from a place like Southern Railway, which was very buttoned up and very straight up and down, and if you wanted to know this, that's a guy that would know that, and he could find it out, or he'd talk to so-and-so and find it out, and instantly you'd get your information back and you could start on your thought process. Didn't work that way when they didn't have any organization that worked very well.
One aside, I noticed you referred to Mr. Crane and Mr. Hamilton, and I recall from my days on the N&W, everybody above you was Mr. And you wouldn't think about going to somebody's office without putting your coat on.
Right.
And it was pretty formal and well, pretty formal. Was that your recollection of
That's
the?
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And Conrail was never like that.
No. And then when Mr. Crane came up there, I called him Mr. Crane. I think I was probably the only guy there that called him Mr. Crane, but I just out of force of habit, that's what I did.
Did you always do that, or did he ever get to the point where?
Oh no, I finally got around to it.
Well, and look at Derek Jeter always referred to George Steinbrenner as Mr. Steinbrenner.
Right.
You know, I mean, there are certain things that just feel natural to you,
Yeah,
the way you conduct yourself. And I just thought it was an interesting culture difference between the railroads, particularly in the South, and versus the ones up in the North and the
Right.
Northeast. And the whole industry is much less formal and rigid
Right.
culturally than it was.
Culture, yeah.
And I guess you guys started that at Conrail. So the talent pool at Conrail was pretty good. I think Stanley Crane made a comment one time that the only thing I took to Conrail was my briefcase, that the people in place were really pretty good. Was that largely Jordan's doing?
Yeah, I think so. They were out looking for the right kind of people, and they didn't do much with the operational side because that was already pretty much in place. Well, not in place. I mean, it had to be put in place when Conrail started. But once it got set up, Dick Houseman had that, and that was his baby. And then Jordan could probably make decisions about all the other stuff, but Dick was going to run the operational side. So, but other than that, he went out and really got the best guys.
And Dick Steiner was in the marketing department when you got there?
No.
Or you brought him in?
Yeah. Dick was I think a candidate for the job I had. And so when I heard that he would move, I went and hunted him up and talked him into coming to Conrail, working with me.
So did you know him before?
Yeah.
How?
Yeah. Well, he was one of the good guys in the Penn Central at one time, like on those rate increases I was talking to you about.
Okay.
He and I would, after we had the formal meeting with all the big powers to be, he and I'd get together and figure out what the real answer was, and then because of, as I told you about Southern strength, then we'd just push it through their organization, whether they wanted it or not.
So you were the one that talked him into coming down to
Yes.
Philadelphia. And can you talk a little bit about the other key players on the team?
Yeah, like Charlie Marshall was a legal counsel at the commercial side. I don't know what the exact title would be, but anyway, he handled the rate stuff at the ICC and things. And so then there were some other guys like when I got there, the car distribution was really messing up the marketing side because, for example, Bethlehem Steel wasn't getting gondolas, and they had all this business that they were going to ship out. Well, I went around to some of these yards, and there'd be acres of gondolas sitting there. I said, "They bad ordered or something?" No, well, I just got kind of a mumbling answer. And so what I did is I took some of the sales guys off the street, put them in motels at all the major yards, and then have them check all of the empties that came in and all the empties that went out, and then how many were left over and how come they were all sitting there. And then worked up a big report, and then I turned that over to Dick Spence. So then he changed so then I had the car distribution guy. So then I had Emmett Posey ran that, and he did a good job.
So Dick Spence was the president, chief operating officer, had come over from the SP, and he wasn't there a terribly long time.
No, he got kind of cross with. I think, well, it's a hard problem because he was such a good guy and a good friend. But the problem was he really wasn't in charge of the operational side where he wanted to be in charge. That's the part he wanted to change, and he couldn't get through that, and Jordan wouldn't push it. So he finally just got frustrated and left.
Okay, so it was Hasselman's Railroad, and
Yes.
and he didn't want two people in the chair, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's right. And you don't blame Dick. Well, I don't need any help. I'm doing fine. Just never mind.
Right. So the railroad bled money for quite a while, and you and Charlie and Dick Steiner and others came up with ways to improve the profitability of traffic and shed unwanted business. Can you talk a little bit about the marketing strategy?
I did a couple of things. One of them is I set up an organization to shed some more branch lines and pieces of railroad. It could be main lines or whatever, but just get rid of railroads that we don't need. We still had way too many. So set that group up, and that's what they did. They studied those things and talked about it. It was kind of like the branch line analysis that we'd done at the USRA. So then it started there. So then we kept looking at what made money and what didn't make money. And we ran all of these rough and ready studies. They weren't very sophisticated, but, here again, don't let the perfect drive out the good. Do what you can. So we studied it, and we said, wow, we got business that makes money. We got business that would make money if we had the right structure. We have business we're not handling because we don't have the right structure. We got businesses we shouldn't be in. We got services that we're providing that we shouldn't provide, like transit and special switchings and so forth. So let's tackle that. Well, then, of course, commerce guys are saying, hey, might have a real problem here getting this through. So we thought, we really don't care. When you're losing $1 million a day, your feeling about change is much different than if you were making money.
Right.
So we said, well, let's tackle it. So we started putting together different scenarios of different plans of trying different things. And Interstate Commerce Commission wouldn't go for any of it. They blocked everything we were doing. And so we just kept pushing them. In fact, Dan O'Neill was the chairman of the thing, came up to Philadelphia, got on the train, came up and said, you guys got to stop. You're just, you're not going to get anything done. Why don't you sit down and work with us, and we'll work this out, and you'll get the rate structure. I said, well, okay, here's 10 of them. Why don't you try these? Well, no, we can't do those. So I said, okay. So the war continued. So that was just the way it was going. So then that led to Jordan saying, well, if they won't agree to this stuff, let's take them to Congress. And so you go to Congress, you say, we're losing $1 million a day.
Of your money.
Of your money. Yeah, right, of your money, well put. And we've tried to change it, and these people won't let us, and the law is the reason. So let's change the law. And he and the people he had working with him on that subject did a good job.
Was it outside counsel or?
Yeah, right.
Oh, okay.
Outside counsel and our Washington. We had a couple of Washington guys, and they pushed it.
So Dan left the ICC job somewhere around then, because Darius Gaskins came in to help drive through deregulation.
Right.
And did that change the process when he was there? Did things get a little easier?
Well, at first he couldn't do much. It was kind of like, even though you're the boss, it's kind of like hollering up the rain pipe. It just, you'd have to ask, well, I think you did ask him about that, but basically, he needed that law as much as we did, because he agreed with what we wanted to do. So then we got it. And then the thing is, once you get a piece of legislation passed, it's not one of these, well, we got that fixed. It was, now what are you going to do with it?
Right.
What things can you implement out of that piece of legislation that you couldn't do before that you can now do? So we started with the easy ones, and fixing the places where we're losing big amounts of money, and places where we could sign contracts with big customers and tie down the volume for a price. We did those fairly quickly. Then it came down to the divisions on the interline. And,
always a fun topic.
yeah. And I had been at one time in charge of the division department at Missouri Pacific Railroad, so I knew all the ins and outs of all that business. So Dick Steiner and Charlie and myself and a few others said, the only way to do it is to blow up the whole system. And we'll charge proportional rates. If you're moving soda ash from Wyoming to Pittsburgh, you charge what you want to Chicago. I'll charge what I want from Chicago to Pittsburgh, and that'll be the price. There'll be no division. And nobody else can participate in the business except you and I, because we connect directly. So that cuts out a lot of little carriers. It cuts out a lot of points out through the rail system that traffic was being delivered to us. So, but boy, all hell breaks loose because it blows up the division and it blows up the rate bureaus. And that's the way the railroads had always made rates all of their lives. And all of a sudden we said, we're out. We won't come to those meetings anymore. We're not going to talk to you. And if you want to talk to us, call us directly and we'll make a price with you. And that's it.
And how long, I mean, I remember when this was going on. How long do you think it took before people sort of got acclimated to the new reality?
It took a good little while, but I tell you, once they got it going, got it in their head that made sense.
Yeah.
Then
it's much easier.
Huh?
It's much easier when you get down to it.
Yeah, it's much easier. And then the other railroads started to say, hey, well, that's pretty cool. And because at first it was just viewed as a beggar thy neighbor theory of Conrail's extracting money out of our pocket. And Crane, when he came up to Conrail, had told me later that his first inclination was he was going to fire Dick Steiner because he'd treated Southern Railway so badly.
Yeah.
He didn't blame me, right? Dick Steiner. I said, well, okay. But then after you get up there and Dick Steiner came in and made a few of these presentations about how good it was, boy, then he became Crane's favorite guy because he really knew it.
I think the other thing, and I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about it, was I think Conrail led the charge to go away from hundredweight rates to per car rates. Per car rates got rid of all of the fights over, billing irregularities.
Yeah.
And I think you guys started that. Is that your?
Yeah, that was another social problem in the sense that you could only carry that about so far because there were some commodities that some unknown reason they wanted to do it just with the weights, and so, but it made so much sense to just say, see that car out there, we're going to charge you X number of dollars for it. Now, part of the other railroad people were saying, well, everybody's going to overload the car. I'll have too much weight in the car. Well, yeah, probably.
But you do sample checking to see if that's the case.
Right.
And weighing cars leads to service delays. The other thing that I'd be interested in your comment about is you segmented the marketing department into groups of commodity related, like business units. I remember the intermodal group and the, automotive and so forth. So was that the first time that had been done? I don't recall any other carrier. Now everybody does it.
Yeah, it was just made common sense. You wanted to have a group of people that were going to focus on a certain set of problems, and not every problem is the same. I mean, in the sense that lumber different than iron ore.
In '78, Stu Reed came in to become president of Conrail.
Yes.
How did that transpire? Why did they pick an automotive guy?
I have no idea. They just magically appeared as far as I was concerned.
Did you know that Jordan was stepping
Well,
in?
I knew that Spence was leaving.
And, okay, he replaced Spence.
Yeah,
That's right.
he replaced Spence.
But he just appeared. You weren't involved in the.
No.
So he stayed quite a long time, as I recall. It was like 10 years.
He did, yeah, right.
And it's an unusual background, being from American Motors, to come into the railroad business.
Yeah, I didn't. I think he was a little bit of a fish out of water for part of the time, and well, most of the time. His hearing was okay. I mean, you could explain stuff to him and kind of go along, but it just probably part of it is a bias on my part for being a railroad guy, then having this guy come in and
Not know the business.
not know the business, and really didn't seem to be offering to me much of what we should be doing.
So when Reagan became president, we got a new Secretary of the DOT, Bob Blanchette's the FRA administrator, who I think had been a trustee of the New Haven.
What?
And was well versed in the difficulties of railroading in the Northeast. And then Stanley Crane comes in as CEO. Did you see that coming?
I knew it probably more before anybody else. Crane got word, I think, that job was going to be, that Jordan wanted to go back to insurance or wherever he was. So he called me up and said, do you think this is doable? Do you think we can make Conrail work? And so my contribution to Conrail's well-being was I lied to the new chairman. I said to him, yeah, it's going to work. And told him, here's a bunch of reasons why we can make this thing work. And so he came, and so he did. And he started making a difference the day he got there.
Mark Twain made a distinction between lies and truth stretchers. And I think you were more stretching the truth.
That's right.
So, can you talk about his arrival on the scene and,
Yeah, he arrived on the scene, and typical railroad guy, he wants to go out and see the property. So he's out touring the property. And so he looks over there and sees a bunch of buildings and yards and says, what's all that? Well, just some extra buildings and so forth. So, well, what are they used for? Well, we haven't used them for quite a while. Well, what are they doing there? And this kind of thing. He went through the whole up and down the property and just made them, because what was happening, they didn't want to spend the money to clean up the yards. Well, as you know from being a brakeman, unclean yards are a dangerous place to work.
They sure are.
And so he wanted everything cleaned up. He wanted junk out of there. He wanted piles of ties going. He wanted everything out of there. So that's kind of the start. And then he would help us from a standpoint of service problems and so forth. He would really work with us.
Now, he's got a different management style than Ed Jordan had.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, how did that go over at Conrail?
Because of his assertiveness, they were a little bit afraid of him at first. But he came across as saying, I want to hear from you and I want to know what's going on and I want you to come up with stuff. So I told people who worked for me, I said, look, after long years of working around Stanley Crane, here's what to do. If he asks you for your idea, come up with the best you can and give him your idea. But if it doesn't work, don't sweep it under the rug or deny it ever happened. Go back to Mr. Crane and say, well, that one didn't work, but maybe we could do this. And he would work with you. He'd appreciate that. So that's what his style was.
Pretty demanding.
Demanding, but still fair.
Yeah. Did he make any management changes that you thought were appropriate or not appropriate?
He didn't make a lot of changes. He just took over what he had, and he took over with the guys that were there. And he would do a lot of digging and pushing, but he wouldn't He didn't take the people. He didn't change the people out.
Yeah. So it's interesting in the notes that I have for this, it wasn't until 81 that Conrail got relieved of having the burden of commuter traffic. I didn't realize it was that long, or I'd forgotten it.
It was awful.
And, you're losing $1 million a day. Well, a lot of that could have been attributed to that. That had to be a huge relief.
Well, it was. And, you're from the eastern part of the United States. You realize the size of the commuter operation in New York, New Jersey, and in Philadelphia. I mean, you're talking about big systems.
So when, at the time of my departure in April 1st of 76, I think I recall there were about 105,000 employees all in for Conrail. At the time of it being filleted by NS and CSX, it was down to 24,000, 25,000.
20-something, yeah.
That's a big change. Shedding branch lines is a political football, certainly, but shedding labor is certainly had to be a major challenge at that magnitude. Can you talk a little bit about how you managed to go through that?
It was a interesting process. One of the things is we got rid of a lot of them when they went with the commuter, so that helped. Then the various unions were probably finally coming around to realizing that, hey, this operation is going to be our bread and breakfast, and so let's use it. Then I think it was the 4R Act, had some money in to buy out slots. So we could buy out a position and we didn't have to refill it. I think it was $25,000. It seemed like a lot of money at the time, but we used that totally. We used up all the money every year. There was, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years there where we had that money. So we would get these slots covered so that we didn't have to refill them. And it was tedious, as you can imagine. It was
Sure.
Man by man.
Right.
Yeah.
But it made a huge difference overall in the overhead of running the company.
And then the other thing too is once you change that rate structure that we were talking about to the proportional rates, a lot of small yards and small operations were closed out because we didn't go there anymore for our major. We went there for local traffic, but we didn't go there for interchange. So you had less engines and less people working there. So you've concentrated on your major routes.
The Conrail X.
There you go.
So in 84, the government says, okay, we're going to sell it. And Mrs. Dole announced that NS was going to buy it. My recollection was she and Mr. Crane had a fairly tense relationship for a period of time. What can you comment about that?
Oh, well, it was just one of those things where they said they were going to sell it, and that's that. And Crane was trying to be reasonable, talk some sense in it. Pretty soon it wasn't a chance to be reasonable, it just was. She just threw him out of the office virtually, and he stormed out of there. And so then Conrail then went to Congress and said, hey, wait, we can make this work. Then we got the labor unions in, and they agreed to participate. And in fact, they took a wage cut, temporary wage cut, so that Conrail could have more money. And finally, Crane prevailed. It was a tour de force by him, I tell you.
Yeah, yeah. I recall a lot of that because it made the press.
Yeah.
So you then go off to CSX. Can you talk about that? That's a big change of.
Yeah, it was a big change. If I'm there, got everything running, got the thing going, and then I'm looking around and Stuart Reed's the same age I am, so I'm looking at him and say, well, okay. So then Hayes Watkins came and said that he wanted to consolidate the LNN and the Seaboard Coastline and the B&O and CNO, all those people together, and he wanted to start with the marketing side. And he wanted me to do that. I thought, well, that sounds interesting. So I agreed to go there. Then Mr. Crane got mad.
I was going to say, how did it go over with him?
Oh, God. I've never seen him that upset with me. I mean, he and I had our arguments over the years about how to do something, but it was all based on the facts.
Right.
His facts are different than my facts, so we can't agree. But boy, that was personal. So, and it stayed that way for a couple of years.
Oh, really?
He didn't talk to me.
Oh, my God.
Go to an industry meeting, I'd walk up to him, and he'd just walk away. But finally, I cornered him and said, boss, we got to have this out. He said, well, you left. I said, look, what I'm doing, what would I to do? I'm just sitting there. He said, well, I wasn't going to. I'm going to do something. I said, well, okay. So we settled it.
Got back to semblance of normality.
Yeah, it'd be at least be friends. Yeah.
Okay. So can you talk about the CSX?
Well, we started out, go ahead. We started pulling stuff together. I moved to Jacksonville because that's where they were thinking about putting the operational stuff. And I said, well, you want to have your marketing and sales guys the same place as the operational people because we need to talk about what we're selling here. And so that's agreeable to them. So I moved down and we get started. And I just start getting acclimated. And then about that time they came up with, McKinsey came up with a study and said, well, the way to run this is with 3 different units. Have a marketing and sales unit, a car distribution unit, and a operation unit. And I thought that was the dumbest idea I ever heard. So, but that's what they were going to do.
So I'm sure you expressed that opinion to the chief.
I did. I got called in. Dick Sandberg called me and was in New Orleans and with some customers, and he said, you got to come up to Richmond right away. Oh, I said, oh, I don't. I thought it was just one of their normal meetings. And I said, no, you got to take care of it. I got customers now. He said, no, Hayes wants to talk to you personally. I said, oh, okay. So I got on a plane or something, got up there, and he said, everybody in the company agrees to do this and thinks it's a good idea except you. I said, oh, really? He said, but tell me why you think that way. That's what I liked about Hayes. He kind of listened to you. And so I told him that I thought it was a goofy idea, and I had all these reasons. And so he said, well, tell you what, we're committed and we're going to do it, and I'd like to have you be part of it, and I want you to stay here and see if we can't make this work. So I agreed. So I've always admired him for at least sitting down with me and
Right.
telling me what the deal was.
Yeah, sometimes you just get voted off the island.
That's right. That's right.
So how long did that last from him saying, I'd like you to give it a try, to you moving on back up to Philadelphia?
They had that system, but we slowly but surely, all the participants were starting to merge it back together.
Oh,
Just surreptitiously, I guess
Yeah.
would be the word, just
Yeah.
trying to make
or just practically speaking.
in practice we were doing the right things.
So how did it come about that you ended up getting asked back to Conrail?
Well, Dick Sanborn went up there. Crane hired Dick Sanborn, the board hired Dick Sanborn to take over the presidency of the railroad, and he hadn't been there too long, but Crane had just left, so now he's the chairman and the operating officer. And then he died. Had a heart problem, I think. And so now they're back on the market looking for somebody.
Do you think that Crane's hiring Sanborn rather than you had anything to do with your past?
Probably.
Yeah. Was he involved in you? He had retired, right? But
Yeah.
was he involved in you being selected
sure.
again?
Yeah, going back.
Okay. That had to be a pretty gratifying move, didn't it?
It was, and I was gratified to have it happen, and I was very appreciative of all the people that were involved. And just one quick story: Dick Hasselman, who was the operating guy, they was under consideration. He asked to be under consideration. And then when they found, then they said, well, you're not going to get it. He said, well, if I don't get it, you ought to hire Hagen. So, well, okay, that's a good recommendation.
Well, plus probably no resentment of you taking, quote, his job in those circumstances, which is always a good thing. Was Mary happy to go back to the Philadelphia area?
I think she was glad to have me be away from that CSX problem that bothered me. I didn't work well there.
Yeah.
So I think she was glad to see that. So.
I think you described it as a rejection of antibodies or something like that,
right,
in the organism.
And the other thing too is that Mary was a stockholder in the Conrail. When the stock came out, we were at some friend's house, and they said to me, hey, do you think this stock is a good buy, or do you think you ought to buy it? And before I could say anything, Mary said, well, yes, I bought some, and I think it's a good buy. Well, I didn't know she had any money, and I didn't know she knew a stockbroker, but
learn something new every day.
Right, but she did. But anyway, she had the right thing to say. They said to her, Mary, well, why did you buy it? She said, well, I know the people, and I know they'll do well. And I thought, well,
that's a good.
That was good.
Good thing to say. So, how did it come about that you're running the organization? It's starting to do better. It's starting to make money. Things seem to be looking up. Congress gets rid of USRA as sort of it took them a little longer to do.
Should have done that on April 2nd.
Yeah.
76.
And they did it in 87.
Yeah.
What was USRA doing in the meantime?
Well, they were supposed to be overseeing Conrail. So they were getting reports in and studying stuff and making commentary, and they were wasting their time and they were wasting our time. So
yeah,
and we were nice to them because
so you started to change the culture at Conrail, right? What are the things that you wanted to do? What are the things that you were uppermost in your mind, the things you wanted to change for the better?
What were they?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. One of the things that always bothered me was the rigid hierarchy of railroads. It was like being in the military,
Right.
to a certain degree. And so you might tell the boss something, but he was going to decide it. And then all down the line, it was yes, boss, yes, boss, yes, boss. And so it finally had this hierarchical running the thing. Well, when you went out and walked around on the property, and you were one of the junior guys out there, you could see, hey, things could be a lot different here if you let me change it. No, you can't change it because that's the way we've always done it. So I just wanted to boil this down so that we had less of a hierarchical thing. And yes, you're still the boss, you still make the decision, but you got to listen to people, what they say, and ask their opinion on how to do it. So that was kind of one of the major things.
And you did town hall meetings across the system, right?
Yeah, right.
I think you were the first one to do that. Matt Rose did a lot of them at BN after this, but I don't think I ever heard anybody in the railroad business doing that till you did it.
Well, and it was, it made a certain amount of sense when you think about it. People need to see you. They need to know who you are. They need to know why we're doing things the way we're doing. You don't go out there, but you don't go out there completely to give them a lecture. You go out there to say, what are you guys doing? How are you doing it? What's this for? Why are you doing it? And people can relate to that. One time I was in the office, and these two guys in out of the mechanical department came into my office, and the union guys, and they said, I said, oh guys, how you doing? And I showed them around the office, and we chit-chat a little bit, and I said, well, okay, now what's the problem? Why are you here? Oh, nothing. You'd said at one of those meetings that come up and see you if we wanted to, and so here we are. And that's the only reason they were there, just to see if I was...
If you really meant it.
I really meant
Could you get in?
Right. So anyway, that was kind of the fun thing.
Well, that's probably a little surprised they weren't there with a complaint about something.
That's one of the things that goes with your job at that level is most of the time people come to see you not to say, have a nice day.
Right.
Whether it's a shipper or another railroad or a union guy or somebody, they come to say,
yeah, you have an issue and
I've got this issue and you need to fix it.
Right.
Oh, okay.
One of your former colleagues, I don't remember who, described you as the Dwight Eisenhower of the railroad industry. And when I think back to his mission of trying to hold a coalition together and make it function as a team, there is some truth in that. And I think your style seems to be more of that collaborative than it is, I'm the boss, do it this way.
Yeah, sure.
And
I think also it helps you from a management standpoint. When you propose to do something different and you want to have a deadline and you're going to do it by this time, one of the management guys would say, we're going to have this done by June 1st and we'll put it in operation. And I'd look down the table at some of the more junior guys there, and they got like, so I'd call them up later and say, what do you think about that date? Is that date okay? Oh my God, Mr. Hagen, we can't make that date, so forth. So you can, and then you can go back to the guy that told you the date and say, hey, I've been thinking about that. Let's move that date. You don't need to insult him by saying,
right,
it's stupid. You just say, could we move that a week or a month or whatever? Oh yeah, okay.
So When did you start thinking about alternatives for Conrail, either merger or sale or?
Well, basically, that was always coming up because everybody was in the industry was kind of weighing things about where it would go. And one of the things that with Conrail was we had pretty good sized markets, but we were in a declining market. We were not a growth industry. And stuff was moving south and moving to the southwest and various things. So where do we go from here? Can we just stay in place? And the Southern reached out and merged with the NS. And the CSX was consolidating all their lines down there. And so when the NS came around and were interested, then I talked to them. Say, well, we'll see, because part of the problem is the old game: who's going to be left out?
Right, when the music stops.
Yeah, when the music stops, who doesn't have a chair? So I thought, well, we'll listen to it and see what they can come up with. And we had not very serious conversations, but price per share type conversations.
So NS was the first one to express interest.
Yeah, and you can imagine who instigated that.
I can.
Jim McClellan.
Of course. Well, I mean, it was sort of a natural thing to explore, I guess. At the time,
Oh, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
You said it was fairly casual conversation. It wasn't serious. Why do you think that was?
Well, I think it was pretty casual conversation. It was because nobody had a whole bunch of facts. Like, here's my balance sheet and here's my income statement, or because everybody had that because it's public information. But nobody was giving them each other any traffic flows or anything about what might take place.
Okay.
It was more a theoretical discussion about should we do something.
And then it just quieted down for a while?
Yeah.
Because according to my notes, that was in 92, and then in 94 you met with David Good from NS, and it got more serious.
Yeah.
How did that transpire?
And that was here again. They came to us and came to me and said, we're going to be at the Greenbrier or someplace, and let's talk about this. I said, oh, okay. So we thought it was interesting to have Conrail and Norfolk Southern have a merger discussion
at the
Greenbrier, which is owned by the
CSX. Right.
So anyway, and so we talked about it a little bit, but their view of where Conrail was going was your earnings and price are going to be static, and we're going to grow. And so therefore we can't, I'm putting words in their mouth. I'm trying to analyze what they were thinking. Anyway, they could only come up with X amount of money.
Okay, so it was a financial non-starter at the time.
That's right.
Interesting in what actually transpired. The money didn't seem to be the issue anymore.
Well, that's it. Once they figured out CSX was going to do something to them, CSX and Conrail figured, well, NS is not going to go big on this. They're going to be satisfied with whatever we give them. And they'll argue about it, but we can satisfy. Boy, they went completely the other way and said, we're going to win this thing, and we're going to win it big.
Maybe CS bugged those rooms at the Greenbrier and they knew what was coming.
Right.
So you got to the point where you said, it's time for me to retire.
Right.
And this is still up in the air about what's going to happen.
Well, it was, but Conrail was going along fine.
Yeah.
Everything's okay. And CSX hadn't started their conversation quite yet. And NS had gone away because I told them they couldn't come up with the money, don't come back here. So we were just kind of set. And then CSX came and wanted to talk. And by that time, I'm retired. So I said, well, and they talked to me about it. And I said, well, talk to David. I don't, okay. Well, would I come to a meeting? So I went to the first meeting, and I was like kind of the fifth wheel. I was sitting there, and I thought, I don't have any.
No dog in the hunt.
I don't have any dog in this hunt. I'm just sitting here. So that was kind of the end of my participation up to Conrail and CSX made a formal deal, and then the board of directors did ask me what I thought about it.
And what did you tell them?
I thought, shows you how much I knew. I told them, I said, I think it's doable. And they were willing to give Levan control of the railroad, of the CSX Conrail Railroad. So if Conrail could use its style and what it does to help CSX be different than it was, which they wouldn't appreciate, but that was it. And we could satisfy NS without major disruption. I said, you could probably do it. And Claude Brenniger, who was on the Conrail board by that time, said, well, if we do, there's no going back. Once you're in play,
right,
it's going. I said, well, that's a risk, and I can't tell you about that.
So how did Dave Levan get picked to succeed you? He was in the organization already.
Yeah, I was part and parcel of that in the sense that he was a financial guy, and he'd had various jobs, finance, and in charge of the computers and so forth. And then Don Swanson, who was running the operation at that time, said, hey, I want to take Levan in here and make a real railroader out of him by putting him in the operating department. So he brought him in, and he then toured around the railroad. And
what did he do in the operating department?
he was probably vice president at the time, but
Okay.
It was be second in command to Swanson. It was kind of a learning job, and I think he did a good job. So anyway, that was.
I remember you taking me in to meet him, and you introduced me to him, and your comment was, yeah, I'm here, forgotten but not gone. I've always remembered that as yeah. So this thing got a little bit crazy then between the two suitors, right, in terms of bidding up the price, which was all to the benefit of the Conrail shareholders.
Oh, yeah, right.
In looking back over it now, you made the comment a minute ago, shows you what I know about the doability of it. Do you have a view of what it might have been, what should have happened to Conrail? Wipe the slate clean, it's a whiteboard, you could draw out anything you want and have it magically occur. What do you think would have been a good outcome?
Well, it sounds disloyal to the Conrail guys that made it work, but probably ended up with the best scheme in the sense that, excuse me, if you would have continued on, there had always been this tension about who's going to do what to whom. If one would have bought it, then you'd had the other one feeling like, uh-oh, I'm left out and they're going to do something different. So I think probably, well, it didn't do the Conrail people good service. I think it probably was the best solution for the Eastern Railroad problem. You got competition, you got good, strong companies who can afford to fix track, fix cars, do all this kind of stuff.
Have you, do you stay in touch with Dave Levan at all?
No, really, he went back to where he's from, and he started his motorcycle shop.
Yeah, he's running a.
He just kind of dropped off the system.
Went completely out.
And he got tagged as being kind of a bad guy in this process of the merger thing, but he was a good guy. He should have been fared better.
So right now, I'd like to go back to the two questions I said I really wanted to ask toward the end, which was, are there things that you would do differently now, looking back over it all? Are there things that you said, boy, I wish I'd really done that instead of that? Or anything that comes to mind?
Well, anytime you look back on a career, you always say, whoop. And some of the things that I thought were going to be problems, like going to USRA, was really a hard job. My wife said my hair went from black or brown or whatever to totally gray there in a boost of about 2 years, because we didn't work Christmas Day, but we worked right Christmas Eve up till about 6 o'clock, and took the day off, and then the next day went back at it. I mean, that was hard, but I don't regret doing it. Probably the one that I do regret is making the move to CSX. When I go places, I like to say, well, I did something. I fixed this, I did that. I was just there. And I think I helped some, but I couldn't.
You can't plant a flag and say, I really made a change.
I changed that.
Yeah.
I changed that, and I didn't change it.
And then the other key question, of course, is what are you most proud of? And that doesn't have to be one thing, it can be a dozen, but what are the things that when you look back say, boy, I'm really glad I did that, or, this worked out well. And
Well, I think basically it has to do with being at Conrail. That marketing job with Dick Steiner and Charlie and everybody, we were able to say, here's a problem, and let's solve it. And I was proud of doing that. Wasn't perfect, but it was, given the times and everything, I thought it was a good job. And I was also proud of being the boss. Took a certain satisfaction of saying, while I was there, everything improved. Even though we had a couple downturns in business that were really scary, but we were able to overcome them and do the work and get things done. And I just enjoyed, on all these jobs, I enjoyed working with the people.
Yeah. Yeah, you're fortunate to have really good ones to work with.
Well, that's it. And something about, having people that are smart and dedicated and a little bit adventurous, want to tackle things, really makes work fun. Theoretically, I wasn't the grand strategist of all time. That was more let's think this, now that we've got these great ideas, let's boil them down and do something about them. And I thought that mixed well as I went through life.
Yeah. It had to be, if you were standing on the football field at, in high school looking into the future, it'd be a hard one to predict.
No, I probably envisioned myself running a scraper the rest of my life. I figured, well, I can do what I can do, and I'm smart. I'm smart enough to know that I know how to do that, so maybe that's what I'll do.
Well, it would have given you more nights at home.
Right, probably would have.
Well, thank you for sitting through this with us. If there's anything else you want to add to it,
Well, I enjoyed this. It was one of those things that when you talk about it in terms of my own recollection, I enjoy that. And as I always say, I'm good at this if I'm unencumbered by the facts. I can talk about anything you want to talk about.
Right. Well, that's really what we're looking at, is more not so much the history as the person themselves.
Yeah. Well, that's true, because we've got all the great books by Gallimore and McClellan and everybody that says, here's the history.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is a fascinating business. I asked Rob Krebs a question about his, he has a fairly encyclopedic knowledge of the business.
He does.
And got it from coming up the way a lot of us did, starting in the yards and working his way up and so forth, even though he was a trainee and not a union card-carrying trainman. And I asked him, I said, would you have, did it get in your blood, or would this job have been the level of intensity that you have, would that have been the same if you, I think I said, making toaster ovens at Sunbeam? And his answer was pretty much, it would have been the same wherever I was. That's the way I approach things. He didn't really feel that the industry got in his blood. I'm curious for you, it's an interesting industry. I never found a dull day in it, particularly. Did it get in your blood? Do you feel?
Yeah, I'm afraid it did. I was so interested in it as it went along that I thought it could be different and we could do something about it. And I always wanted to do that. Now, I might have got as interested in making toaster ovens, I don't know, but basically it's so big and it had such an impact on the United States that really was interesting to me to be involved.
Yeah, and it's so diverse, from the commodities it hauls and the customers that it serves. And it's you learn a lot about geography and history and tradition.
Oh, you
and
do.
all those things that go along with it.
Yeah, I was someplace I was talking to some guy from Oklahoma, and he said, until I always ask people where they're from. And I said, well, you won't know where I live. I said, well, I know the names of towns. I may not have been there, but I know the names of a lot of towns. Tell me the town. Well, it happened to be a town I'd been to. So I said to him, well, now when you come into town, do you live toward the greenhouse on the left or toward the creamery on the right? Well, this guy was like,
how do you know that?
Yeah, but it was just happenstance, but it was fun.
Some of those are amusing occurrences that you get to go through. So, well, thank you again.
You're quite welcome.